people treat you nice, but then the longer you get settled in and you start fermenting, folks start doing things that help you ferment. Okay. I wish I had some witness here. And so you get better with age. And aged wine is better than the new wine. But the new wine that Jesus made, turned the water into wine, was better than the first. And so we ought to be better now than we were when we began. Because it's a process for wine to be fermented. They have to store it for a long time. They have to make sure that all of the flavor in the wine, all barley, all wheat, whatever they're making it out of, is thoroughly seeped into the water. They have to make sure that the ingredients, in some cases they use sugar. We got some bootleggers in here. In some cases they use sugar and other things to ferment it. But they have to wait until all of the barley leaves, the grape leaves, and the seeds settle to the bottom. And then it is filtered out. But if the fermentation take place, then all of the barley or the grape seeds or the leaves will not settle. So when it's not settled, people don't want to be drinking wine and taste the seeds and the leaves. So something is wrong. So if we don't allow God to ferment us, when we speak to folks, they're getting seeds, leaves, and some of everything. Because we did not allow God to purify us. I need some help, Holy Ghost. So Jesus tells the servant to fill the pots with water. He tells them to draw some and take it to the master of the feast. The master of the feast probably was what we call the wedding coordinator. Usually the best wine was served first. Then after everybody was somewhat intoxicated, they would serve the worst wine. I had a man, he's going on now, be with the Lord, but he was a saved deacon. He said when he was in the world, he said the way that he knew he was drunk, when he went into a bar, he said he would fix his eyes on the ugliest woman in the bar. And when that woman started looking good, he knew he was drunk. So, but when the master tasted this wine, he said, "You have saved the good wine for this time." And this increased the disciples' faith in Jesus. This was his first miracle in their eyes. Now, the beginning of miracles did Jesus in, this is verse 11. The beginning of miracles, so that's the first, did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifest forth his glory. And his disciples believed on him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother, and his brethren, and his disciple. And they continued there not many days. So this was the beginning of the first miracles. This increased the faith of his disciples because they saw the miracles. Now, in John's gospel, miracles are called signs. What did I say? Miracles are called what? Indicating that they pointed to what? His messiahship. It's pointed to him as being Christ. Now, John records 7 signs of miracles. And the first one is recorded in John 4. Second one, this was in John chapter 2. But the second one is recorded in the 4th chapter of John. And where John records, and John basically, when he talked about the miracle that Jesus did, he recorded them in a manner that was more detailed than the others. Because John was talking to people that was not saved. Some was and some wasn't. Now, Matthew was talking to Jews, so he could give a synoptic. The Jews were religious people. Mark could talk to people that was more educated because they was part of the Roman Empire. Luke could talk to people that was more educated because they was of the Grecian. So John talked to everybody, so he had to go into more detail. And you'll find that in John's writing, John wrote more verses to explain what happened than the others did. So let's look at what John did in chapter 4 and verse 46 to 54. And I'm not going to read all of that, but I'm going to just give you an idea of what happened. It was the second miracle that Jesus did that was recorded by John. He healed a noble son, or he healed a person's son that we would call a high official. And this person said to Jesus, he said, Lord, my son is sick, and you need to come by my house and pray for him and see him before he die. Because he said he is sick unto death. And Jesus said to him, knowing that you said you all don't believe anything and all you want to do is see a miracle. But Jesus said unto him, said, you go home and your son will be healed. You can see that this probably let the man down in his spirit, because most people think that you have to be right there with them for something to happen. And so the man went home. It took him until that afternoon to get home the next day. When he got home the next day, his son was setting up. His son was healed. And he said to the servant, what time did my son begin to mend? And they told him what time it was. It was the same time that Jesus told him to go, and his son would be healed. And so that was an encouragement to the man. That was his second healing. Now, notice this. This man's son was sick unto death. Everybody say he was sick unto death. The third miracle took place in John 5, 1 through 9. And it's talk about a man that was healed that was impotent. They was at the feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and now there at Jerusalem by the sheep market, a pool which is called in Hebrew tongue Bethesda. Now this was a pool that at a certain time an angel would go into this pool and agitate the water. And if anybody was sick of any kind of disease, if they got in the water while it was agitated or going around like a rotate, they see the water bubbling up like what we call a whirlpool now. If they got in the water, whatever disease they had, they would be healed. Well, Jesus observed the man laying there. And you know, you have folk that'll bring you to places to get help, but they may leave you where you still can't get help. Like I heard Rena said that her mother and her father had already talked to somebody at the store to make sure that she would have help. Sometimes we bring folks to tell people where they can go to get help, but when they get there, they don't know how to get help. This man was brought there. He was lame and crippled. He was brought there, and they set him down. But when the pool was being agitated by an angel, he didn't have nobody to put him in the water. And Jesus walked up to him, and Jesus asked him a direct question. That's why you have to hear what Jesus said. Jesus said to him, will thou be made whole? What Jesus said, do you want to be healed? And the man said, yes, but his focus was only on one thing. See, with Jesus, you have to be able to focus not just on one thing, focus on the whole Jesus. What did I say? Focus on the whole Jesus. So when Jesus said to the man, will thou be made whole? The man said, I can't, because I don't have nobody to put me in the water. He said, every time the water is agitated or the whirlpool comes and I see it, I know the angel's there, but I don't have nobody to put me in. Jesus said, that's not what I asked you. Listen to what I said. Do you want to be made whole? That's the question. Do you want to be made whole? Not by the way you think you ought to be. Not that you come and you expect somebody to put oil on your head, somebody to call God down, or somebody to push you down, or somebody to do all of these things. But do you want to be made whole? Do you want to be made whole? That was the same thing that happened with Naaman. Naaman never would have got healed if he hadn't did what the prophet said. The prophet said to him, said, listen, you go to the muddiest river in Jordan. The man said, there's a lot of other clean water. Why are you going to send me to the dirtiest river? He said, that ain't you. If you want to be made whole, you got to do what the prophet said. And you go there and wash. How are you going to wash in the dirty water and get clean? How are you going to wash in dirty water to get clean? But he said, you go to Jordan and you dip 7 times and your skin going to come back. And the man did it reluctant. Naaman did it reluctant. But on that 8 times, 7 times, when he came up, he saw his skin look like baby skin coming back on it. A lot of time, obedience is better than sacrifice. And so he said to the man, do you want to be made whole? And the man said, yes, I want to be made whole. And then Jesus said to him something else that seemed like that was something he couldn't do. He told him to get up. So take up your bed, get up and take up your bed and walk. The man said, now you know you got to be crazy. I'm laying here because I'm lame. They brought me here. Now you telling me to get up and take up my bed and walk. You know, I'm going to get up and take up my bed and walk and I'm lame. And Jesus reached down, the man got up and took up his bed and went to leaping. Do you understand what I said? Then the next thing he did, you find the next miracle is the miracle of 5,000 people that was fed in chapter 9. Jesus fed 5,000 people. They had followed him out into the desert place. And after following him out to the desert place, then sundown came. And then the disciples said to him, Master, should we send them away? Jesus, having compassion on them, said, how can we send 5,000 people away and they have no food? And the disciples said to him, Master, we don't have enough money to feed all of these people. See, we don't have enough money to feed all these folks, God. How are we going to feed these people? What are we going to do? Jesus didn't already know what he's going to do. And then one of them walked up to him and said, there is a lad here. There is a lad here, but he only have 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. What is that among so many folk? Jesus said, just happen to sit down. Jesus don't count numbers. He make numbers count. So what is 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread among 5,000 people? Jesus said, just get them organized. When you get folks organized, that's why I'm trying to tell you, read the 3rd chapter of St. John. That's why I'm going to tell you, fast for 1 day. That's why I'm telling you, come to prayer and pray 1 hour. That's why I'm telling you, start sharing what God has blessed with you. When it is not all that you're doing that's going to make the difference. It's a matter of obeying. And when you don't obey 1 link, if you got a bicycle, you on your motor, if 1 link of the chain break, you are in trouble. I need some help, Holy Ghost. Your timing belt on a car, if 1 link of that thing is off, that whole motor is off. And you gotta get somebody to set that thing, and they gotta set it right. Now I don't know nothing about it too much now, but they used to have a light to set the timing changer, and they look at that light, and so many revolution had to go by for that light to know that that engine was in sync with everything else. Because the engine, if it's not in sync, then the piston is not going to send up the pressure to make the oil that come between it to keep it greasy, to send the fire to the battery, coming from the battery to the alternator, and the alternator coming to the piston and coming up. You ain't going to get no fire, and your fire will not run the gasoline. You ain't going to get no power. So everything is working together. And that's what Paul said, we all fit together. So when we're not fitting together, then something is missing. You got a bump and a mop and all that junk in the church. God, I need some help here. So do you understand the world designed their stuff after what God's principle was? That we all working together, fitting everything together. If it don't fit, then it don't work. It don't work. And so Jesus told them to set them down. Just set them down and get them organized. When they all had them set down, then they said, well, Master, what are we going to do? He said, bring the bread to me. Bring the fish to me. Just let me do it. Don't find nowhere where Jesus did nothing but bless it. And when he blessed it, he gave a piece to each one of the disciples and told them to go and give it to the people. And they were giving it to the people. But what they didn't understand, that every time Jesus broke off the bread for 5,000 people, bread never got smaller. He just kept breaking it. Whatever God gives you, it never gets smaller. The kingdom of heaven never diminishes. It's never diminished. It just keep growing. And then he gave them that. And then they came back and they said, Master, everybody's eating. The children is eating. And the 5,000 men is eating. Their family is eating. And then Jesus said to them, go take up the fragment. And they took up 12 baskets and said, what are we going to do with this? Give the little boy his basket back because ain't nothing else to that. Give the little boy his fish back. Give him his 5 loaves of bread back. And then there's a basket for each one of you to take to your family. Jesus looks out for everybody. For everybody. That was the third miracle that Jesus did. Then we come to the next miracle is the blind man. Help me say the blind man. Blind man, he's on the road, and here's a man that's standing there, heard that Jesus was coming by. My God, when you come to church, you ought to know that Jesus is already there. You ought to know that you're coming to a place where God is already established. And that's why when folk get sick, you ought to come to church. If it's any way possible, you can come to church. You ought to be at church. I want to thank God for Brother Johnson being back this morning, Brother King being back this morning. Thank God for you. And you was out the other night. He had a setback with a little surgery, but he's here. Glad to see Sister Washington back. I'm saying Washington, not but Sister Richardson back. Glad to see her back. These are people that had setback. It was a time when we first started church that they told you, because we didn't have no type of medical plan. There was no Kaiser, there was no Blue Cross, there was no Blue Shield, there was nothing. All we had when we was coming up was us. Anybody remember that? We had us. That in us was what? Old people that know some remedies for cold. If castor oil, the 366, if that stuff didn't get you well, you didn't get well. And if your parents couldn't get castor oil, they couldn't get Father John, which was a mixture of castor oil and sugar. That was nasty. Because the castor oil, every time you burped, it came back up. You smelled it. I don't care if you're taking it with lemons or whatever. It was nasty. But they knew something that the herbologists are doing now. The herbologists are doing something now that they use castor and castor oil and 366 to do. It clean you out. And they know if they got everything out of you, you're going to be all right. And that's what it did. It cleaned you out. I mean, you would be clean, as the old folks, as a whistle. And you would feel better. You would feel better. That's what the church was for. The church was there, and they would tell you that. And then if you could not afford to get castor oil, and you could not afford Father John and castor oil, they would send you out into the field, and they would go out, and the cows had stuff that passed through them that had fallen on the ground, and they would take it and tie it up in a little sheet, a rag, and boil it. Mother know what I'm talking about. And they called it cow hump tea. Oh, cow chip, it was the same thing. A flower by any other name is still a rose. And they would boil it and you would drink it. And it made you feel better. Because there was a herb, the cows ate the grass. Y'all ain't going to talk to me. I know somebody said, oh, I wouldn't do that. But do you understand that you're doing the same thing now, just they call it different? They extract stuff and they try it out on monkeys and dogs and so forth. And if it work on them and pigs, then they give it to you. Maybe I said give it to us. All right, let me go on. Now, so Jesus, the man was brought out and set on the wayside. He heard that Jesus was coming through. And when he heard the tracks and the steps of Jesus coming and the men with him, he cried out, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And he was blind, and he cried out again, O thou son of David, have mercy on me. And the disciples, some of them went ahead of him and told him to be quiet. You know, folk don't want you, when you are hurting, and then somebody else tell you it's not that bad, they don't know how bad you're hurting. It's easy to tell somebody to be quiet when you're not hurting. And they told him to be quiet. But he cried out loud. And Jesus said, bring him to me. And they brought him to Jesus. And think about this. This is why you have to be specific when you're praying. Don't pray the problem, pray the answer. They brought him to Jesus, and Jesus said to him, when he got there, said, what do you want? And the man was sort of startled. He said, I'm blind and I want to see. And so Jesus laid his hand on him and prayed for him and said, how do you see men? And he said, I see men now, they look like trees. Jesus said, that's too tall to be men. He said, I got to pray for you again. And he prayed for him again. He said, now how do you see men? He said, I see every man like a man. And so when you have folk blinded in the church and they don't know they're blind, those are the folks that see everything that Jesus said. They always don't see it that way. When you got folks who read the scripture and say, that ain't the way I see it, they are blind. Somebody need to pray for them again until their eyes become open and they see God's word as God's word and not see God's word as something else. God, I need some help here. Then the last miracle John recorded in chapter 11.